So I managed to survive the Boston UK Marathon, which is more than can be said for my camera. So we are 5 minutes to 8, Sunday the 28th of April, UK Boston Marathon. The weather is awful. Now I do have a few more clips coming up, but basically my GoPro died at around about mile 10, mile 12, and there was nothing I could really do about it due to the weather. So this video isn't quite what I planned on making. So a marathon distance is obviously the longest I've run this year, and I finished it in 4 hours, 18 minutes, 20 seconds, which put me in 469th out of 702 participants. And the first thing that has to be said is a huge shout out to 702 people turning out to this marathon, because the weather was absolutely dreadful. Equally to all the volunteers and marshals, they all deserve a medal, because quite frankly, standing there even in full wet weather gear must have been a pretty miserable experience, let alone cheering people on. Now, I mean, I'm quite open about the fact that I am a fair weather runner, and I basically, as much as I enjoy running, I only really like running under my own terms. Probably one of the main reasons why I've not run a marathon in over 10 years. And I can honestly say that I've never run in such bad weather, and I have zero plans to run in weather like that ever again. So basically what happened is on the day of the run, it started raining in the early hours of the morning, and it didn't stop until mid-afternoon. So basically, it wasn't torrential, but it was so persistent. It was really, really bad. And if the rain was bad, the wind made it quite devastating. So much so that by the time I'd finished, my hands were so cold they were shaking. It almost made it impossible to actually change my gear after I finished the race. Now, I hadn't prepared for heavy rain, basically because I'm an idiot and I seem to forget that I live in the UK and that bad weather will just happen. I had assumed there would be a shower, which, according to all the websites, was basically what was to be expected up until the day of the race. Now, I don't mind the odd shower. It's fine as long as it's not constant all the way through, and ideally not when you're starting. But other than that, it doesn't really bother me too much. But because the race started at 8 o'clock in the morning on the Sunday, it meant that I had to drive across there on the Saturday and stay overnight. And I left without any wet weather gear whatsoever. However, I was very, very, very lucky to find a discarded jacket in the back of my boot, hidden under some bags, which made all the difference in the world, because there were loads of people, club runners, that were actually just running all in vests, and they are clearly a much tougher breed than I am, because there is absolutely no way I would have been able to finish that just wearing a vest. I would probably have ended up hypothermic, knowing me. As for the route, it was pretty good, and I can imagine on a sunny day it would have actually been really quite enjoyable. But the rain yesterday was so heavy that it basically flooded the roads, and at one point there were even volunteers on one corner shouting and pointing where to run to avoid potholes, because you couldn't see them underneath all of the under the water. So my plan with this run was to run the longest distance that I've done this year, and to see if running without a pack makes that much of a difference to my speed. Now, I tend to concentrate more on time run than the distance I actually make. So, for example, I tend to go out there, right, I'm going to go run for 4 hours, and assume that to be 20 to 22 miles. And obviously I have to have water with me in some way, shape or form. The backpack I carry is normally around about 10 pounds in weight, something along those lines. But after taking off all my clothes and putting them in a plastic bag, by the time I got back, I'm guessing that probably weighed best part of 10 pounds anyway, which, taking that into consideration, means that 4 hours, 18 minutes was probably really, really fast for me. So maybe, being cold and wet is a way of making me run faster. So big positives that came out yesterday for me were my cardio. So it was fine. I had no problems. I think by the time I finished, I was actually comfortable enough that I could have gone on much further. I didn't obviously want to go any further, but I think I could have done cardio wise. Muscles, maybe not so much, but certainly cardio, no problems. Because anyone that's actually watched any of my other videos will know that my main goal for this year is to run Hadrian's Wall. And that obviously is going to be much longer than 4 hours. And I was a little bit concerned about my cardio after having 2 weeks off earlier this month after damaging my ankle. So I was really pleased to feel as though my cardio was actually okay. Now, the second big thing was energy. It was, for whatever reason, it was bang on point. Now, I know a few runners that can do long distances and never hit the wall. They are, again, obviously a different breed to me. If you've seen any of the other videos, you know that like 15 miles, 20 miles, I'll start hitting the wall and bonking out. How did I manage to get away with it this time? Well, there's two things really. First, I was walking around the supermarket and I came the day before and I came across these. Now, I've used gels in the past and I really generally don't like them, but I thought, what the hell, it can't do me any harm to try them. So I got one of these, which is a beta fuel gel and a beta fuel plus nootropics, which from what I understand is basically just a very fancy term for caffeine. And what I did is, like, basically after the first hour I took the plain one, and then after hour 3 I took the one with caffeine, which was fantastic. I mean, it was like a huge, it was like getting hit in the face with a bucket of water, which is the last thing I needed, but it really did. It brought my focus back massively. It was really, really good. But in addition to that, I also used these, which are guava blocks. I got these off Amazon, and they're basically, it's quite interesting because they actually come wrapped in leaves, so you don't have to worry about throwing them in the bin. You can actually just discard the things, and people probably thought I was a complete savage for throwing stuff on the road, but it's just basically just leaves, and they are kind of candied blocks, half caffeine, half normal, that really, again, just hit the spot. So with those two combined, I was basically averaging around about 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour, which may well be the exact amount that I need. Now, I'm sure there are some kind of like calculations you can do for all this kind of stuff, but I'm happy just making it up as I go along. And 60 grams really did, I've not only did I finish with full energy, I didn't feel the need to eat after I finished. I was just absolutely spot on. So that is kind of what I'm going to focus on going forward. I think 60 grams of carbs an hour, and see if that makes a difference. Certainly when I go back on the trails, hopefully this weekend coming, I'm going to be trying that out and just hoping that this time it wasn't a fluke. So all that being said, would I do the run again? The supporters, the volunteers, the marshals, the facilities, the water stops, people handing out sweets, fantastic. Really, really good. If I'm absolutely honest, if that was the first marathon I'd ever done, I think it could arguably have been the last marathon ever done. Maybe not today, but certainly when I was younger, 10 years ago, if I'd never... I'm saying this as somebody who hasn't done a marathon in 10 years. But yeah, it would have put me off, not because of the race, but because of the weather. And so I don't really say this to discourage anybody, quite the opposite, actually. I say it because as well organised as these things are, weather is weather. And at the end of it, there were quite a few people in tears. Well, I say quite a few. There were at least a couple of people I saw in tears, a few others that were clearly quite broken. And I kind of saying it as much to anyone as to my younger self, is that was the hardest run that I've done all year. And I didn't really enjoy it. But I wouldn't want that to put you off. Certainly not to put you off running in general. Because if you make it to the end of something like a marathon, even if you hate it every single minute, you can class yourself as marathon fit. And that is a huge, huge achievement. And even if you didn't make it to the end, I don't think you should ever feel downhearted, because that weather will have played a huge part in how hard that made yesterday. And it shouldn't take away from the amount of hours that you've put in on your training. And you don't want to let just one bad run end your fitness journey, really. I mean, marathons aren't for everyone. They're not for me. I mean, I kind of see marathons a bit like a benchmark, or like a test, or even an exam, really. And in the same way that I don't like exams, I wouldn't quit something just because I failed a test. I mean, there are so many benefits to being fit that it's sometimes hard to remember what it's like to not be fit. And I think if you enjoy running, and if you've been training for any kind of distance, you must be getting something out of it. So my advice would be, regardless of anything, is just to rest, recover, and get back out there. So over 10 miles now. It is, weather's not really getting any better for the volunteers and support here. How fantastic. When the first 10 miles is being overtaken, but you can't do everything. It's not a surprise. Anyway, onwards.